The astonishing story of Padre Pio restoring sight to a blind man. In the quiet town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a piercing scream echoed through the dim corridors of St. Mary's Hospital. Michael Anderson, once a respected investigative journalist, clutched his burning eyes as doctors rushed to his aid. "My eyes! Dear God, help me!" he cried out, his voice raw with agony. Across the state, in a small monastery, Father Pio was deep in prayer when he suddenly opened his eyes and spoke to his assistant in Millbrook. "A man has lost his earthly sight, but through this darkness he shall find a greater light. The truth shall not remain buried forever." That moment marked the beginning of a story that would shake the foundations of faith, justice, and redemption in a small American town. No one could have predicted how one man's quest for truth would unravel a web of corruption, test the limits of faith, and ultimately lead to one of the most extraordinary miracles of modern times. But before Michael Anderson could find his way back to the light, he would have to journey through the darkest valleys of human suffering and betrayal. Michael Anderson stood at the front of St. Patrick's Elementary School, watching his children climb into his wife Sarah's SUV. At 45, he had everything a man could want: a successful career as the lead investigative journalist for the Millbrook Herald, a beautiful family, and a respected position in the community. His salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an air of authority that served him well in his profession, while his warm smile and genuine interest in others made him a beloved figure in Millbrook. Sarah, his wife of 16 years, was a third-grade teacher at St. Patrick's. With her gentle demeanor and patient nature, she balanced Michael's sometimes intense dedication to his work. Their children, Emily and Nathan, inherited the best of both parents. 14-year-old Emily possessed her father's sharp mind and determination, while 10-year-old Nathan had his mother's kind heart and artistic soul. Their family home, a modest 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch, sat 3 blocks from St. Mary's Church, where they attended Mass every Sunday. Michael had grown up in Millbrook, following in his father's footsteps as a journalist, though his father had only covered local events and school board meetings. Michael's ambitions reached further. He believed journalism was a calling to expose truth and fight for justice. His latest investigation had started innocently enough. During a routine review of public records, he noticed discrepancies in the financial statements of the Millbrook Catholic Charities Fund. Small inconsistencies at first, numbers that didn't quite add up, donations that seemed to vanish into thin air. But as he dug deeper, patterns emerged. Large sums designated for the new homeless shelter had been rerouted through a maze of shell companies. The trail led him to unexpected places. Church renovation projects that never materialized, youth programs that existed only on paper, and most disturbing of all, a pattern of systematic embezzlement that spanned decades. What troubled him most wasn't just the missing money, it was the implications. Someone with considerable influence had orchestrated this scheme, someone who understood both the church's financial systems and the town's power structure. Sarah noticed the change in him as the investigation deepened. He worked later, his desk at home covered with financial documents and legal papers. "You're onto something big, aren't you?" she asked one night, bringing him a cup of coffee. Michael nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "The kind of story that could change everything in this town," he replied. "But Sarah, I'm scared of what I might find." His fears weren't unfounded. Anonymous phone calls began coming to their home. Strange cars would park across the street. Emily reported being followed on her way home from school. Michael considered dropping the investigation, but his conscience wouldn't let him. The money stolen from the charity fund was meant for the poorest in their community, families struggling to keep their homes, elderly people choosing between medicine and food, children going to bed hungry. Every Sunday he would sit in church, watching as community members faithfully dropped their donations into the collection basket. Mrs. O'Malley, a widow living on Social Security, always gave what she could. The Rodriguez family, despite their own struggles, never failed to contribute. These people trusted their church, believed their donations were helping others. The betrayal of that trust ate at Michael's soul. The morning before everything changed, Michael sat with his family at breakfast. Nathan was excited about his upcoming school play, while Emily chatted about her debate team competition. Sarah served pancakes, her specialty, and teased Michael about working too hard. It was a perfect morning, the kind that embeds itself in memory. Later, Michael would return to this moment again and again, treasuring its simple happiness. Daddy, Nathan asked, syrup dripping from his fork. Why do you always write about sad things? Michael smiled at his son's innocent question. Because sometimes, buddy, we need to shine a light on the sad things to make them better. He couldn't have known then how prophetic those words would become, or how dearly he would pay for his commitment to shining that light. Judge William Harrison's office in the Millbrook County Courthouse exuded power. Dark mahogany panels lined the walls, and a massive desk dominated the room. At 62, Harrison had served on the bench for over 2 decades, his silver hair and stern demeanor commanding respect. But behind the facade of judicial authority lay a carefully constructed network of influence and corruption that reached into every corner of Millbrook. Father Gregory stood before Harrison's desk, his usually confident posture showing signs of strain. At 55, he had been the pastor of St. Mary's for 15 years, chosen specifically for his malleability. His warm public persona and skillful sermons masked a man who had long ago traded his spiritual calling for earthly comforts. Anderson is getting too close, he said, his manicured hands fidgeting with his collar. The audit trail leads directly to the renovation fund. Harrison's response was measured, calculated. The Herald has always been cooperative with our community initiatives. He lifted a crystal tumbler, ice cubes clinking. Perhaps it's time to remind their publisher about the generous tax breaks his paper receives. The implication hung heavy in the air. This wasn't the first time they had dealt with curious journalists, though none had dug as deep as Anderson. Chief of Police Robert Thompson completed their inner circle. A bulldog of a man with a perpetual scowl, Thompson had risen through the ranks by understanding which questions not to ask. His department's evidence room held countless files that would never see the light of day, investigations conveniently closed or redirected. My boys can increase patrols around Anderson's house, he offered. Just enough to send a message. Their network extended beyond these 3 men. County Clerk David Morrison ensured sensitive documents disappeared. District Attorney Patricia Wells looked the other way when certain cases crossed her desk. Even the local bank president, Thomas Green, facilitated the complex financial transactions that kept their scheme running. Each played their part, each received their share, and each had too much to lose if the truth emerged. The charity fund scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the years, they had built an intricate system of kickbacks, bribes, and favors, construction contracts, zoning variations, judicial appointments. Nothing happened in Millbrook without their knowledge and profit. The Catholic Charities Fund served as the perfect cover, a respectable facade for laundering money and influence. Father Gregory's role was crucial. Every Sunday he stood at the pulpit, preaching about charity and community while knowing the true destination of his parishioners' donations. The guilt gnawed at him in quiet moments, but the lifestyle he had grown accustomed to, the luxury car, the vacations, the expensive wines, silenced his conscience. "What about Sister Mary Catherine?" he asked. "She's been asking questions about the shelter project." Harrison waved dismissively. "Transfer her to another parish. The diocese owes us enough favors. The elderly nun's dedication to the poor had become an inconvenience. They had already moved 3 other priests who showed too much interest in the fund's management." The police chief shuffled uncomfortably. "Anderson's different from the others. He's got a reputation for integrity, and the community trusts him. If he publishes anything," Thompson left the sentence unfinished. They all understood the implications. One exposed thread could unravel their entire operation. Harrison stood walking to the window overlooking the town square. Below, citizens went about their daily lives, unaware of the corruption festering at the heart of their community. "Then we make sure he doesn't publish," he said finally. "Everyone has a pressure point. His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. As Father Gregory left the courthouse, he passed Michael Anderson on the steps. The journalist nodded politely, notebook in hand. The priest managed a smile, even as his stomach churned. In a few hours he would hear confessions offering absolution to others while his own sins multiplied. But like the others in Harrison's web, he had crossed a line years ago that made turning back impossible. The sun was setting over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the church spire. In his office, Harrison made a phone call, setting in motion events that would change lives forever. The machinery of corruption turned smoothly, efficiently, without mercy. They had too much to protect, too much to lose, and Michael Anderson had just become their biggest threat. The evening that changed everything was deceptively ordinary. Michael sat in his office at the Millbrook Herald, the glow of his computer screen illuminating stacks of financial documents. The office had emptied hours ago, but he needed to verify one last detail before submitting his story. The numbers were damning over $15 million, siphoned from charity funds over 12 years, all hidden behind a complex web of shell companies and fraudulent construction projects. His phone buzzed a text from Sarah. "Don't forget Emily's recital tomorrow," he smiled, guilty about missing dinner again. The story was worth it, though. Tomorrow's headline would expose everything: the fake contracts, the offshore accounts, the connections leading straight to Judge Harrison's chamber. He had ironclad evidence, including internal memos and bank transfers that couldn't be explained away. The parking lot was dark when he finally left the building, his laptop bag heavy with documents. The security guard, Tom, had already finished his rounds. Michael's footsteps echoed against the concrete as he walked to his car, his mind still processing the implications of what he'd uncovered. A strange sound made him turn, footsteps, too quick, too purposeful. Before he could react, two figures emerged from behind a van. Their faces were hidden behind ski masks, but their intentions were clear. "Hey!" Michael shouted, dropping his bag and raising his hands. "Take whatever you want, but this wasn't a robbery." One attacker grabbed him from behind while the other approached with something that gleamed in the dim light: a container. The burning came instantly, an agony so intense it defied description. The acid splashed across his face, his eyes erupting in searing pain. Michael's scream echoed through the empty parking lot, a sound of pure anguish that would haunt the security footage later discovered. He fell to his knees, clawing at his eyes, desperate to stop the burning. Through the haze of pain, he heard one attacker speak: "Next time it's your family," then footsteps retreating, a car engine starting, tires squealing against asphalt. Michael crawled blindly, his phone somewhere in the scattered contents of his bag, his world reduced to darkness and agony. Tom found him minutes later, alerted by the screams. The night air filled with sirens as emergency services responded. Sarah arrived at the scene, her face white with horror, hands shaking as she held her husband's hand in the ambulance. "My eyes," Michael kept repeating. "I can't see." The paramedics worked quickly, but they all knew the damage was done. At St. Mary's Hospital, Dr. Elizabeth Chen delivered the devastating news. "The acid has caused severe chemical burns to both corneas," she explained gently. "The damage is extensive." Sarah gripped Michael's hand tighter, trying to be strong for him even as tears rolled down her cheeks. The children waited outside with their aunt, too young to fully understand why their father lay bandaged and trembling in a hospital bed. Chief Thompson arrived to take statements, his practice concern masking satisfaction. "Probably just a random attack," he declared, despite the evidence suggesting otherwise. "Could be those drug addicts from the South Side." His officers made a show of collecting evidence, knowing it would never lead anywhere. Michael, through waves of pain and medication, tried to piece together what happened. His laptop was gone, of course it was. Months of investigation, documents, proof, all vanished. But he had backups, encrypted files stored safely. If he could just think clearly through the pain, remember where everything was. The hospital room filled with a steady stream of visitors, concerned colleagues, church members, friends. Father Gregory himself came to offer prayers, his words of comfort dripping with hidden triumph. Sister Mary Catherine watched from the doorway, her aged face creased with worry and suspicion. She alone seemed to understand the true nature of what had happened. Local news covered the story with carefully crafted neutrality. Local reporter: victim of violent attack, no mention of his investigation, no connection to the charity fund scandal. The Herald's publisher, under pressure, already planned to bury the story. In less than 24 hours, the power structure had protected itself, silencing truth with calculated violence. In his darkened hospital room, Michael lay awake, face bandaged, world black. Sarah had finally fallen asleep in the chair beside him, exhausted from tears and worry. Through the door he could hear the nurses' quiet movements, the beeping of monitors, the normal sounds of a hospital at night. But his mind kept returning to the moment before the attack, the footsteps, the container, the burning. They hadn't just taken his sight, they had stolen his ability to expose the truth, to protect his community, to do the work that gave his life meaning. The first weeks after the attack unfolded in a blur of pain and adjustment. Michael's hospital room became a cocoon of darkness, where time lost meaning. The doctors spoke in carefully measured tones about permanent damage and adaptation strategies. Dr. Chen brought in specialists, but their conclusions remained the same: Michael would never see again. The acid had destroyed not just his corneas, but deeper structures of his eyes. Sarah took leave from her teaching position, spending every possible moment at the hospital. She learned to guide Michael's hands to his food, to describe the weather outside his window, to read him the cards and letters that poured in from the community. But at night, alone in their empty house, she would break down, terrified of the future they now faced. Emily and Nathan struggled to understand their new reality. Emily, ever practical, researched blind assistance programs and learned basic guide techniques. Nathan drew pictures for his father, then cried when he realized Dad couldn't see them anymore. Their Aunt Mary tried to maintain normalcy, driving them to school, helping with homework, but the children's eyes always strayed to their father's empty chair at dinner. The Millbrook Herald published a brief article about the attack, describing it as a tragic random incident. Michael's colleagues wanted to dig deeper, but the publisher made it clear the story was closed. James Parker, a young reporter from the rival paper, began asking questions about Michael's recent investigations. His persistent inquiries earned him warnings from Chief Thompson about interfering with an ongoing investigation. Financial reality hit hard. Medical bills mounted while disability paperwork crawled through the system. The Anderson savings, earmarked for the children's college, began to dwindle. Insurance covered the basic treatments, but balked at the experimental procedures. Dr. Chen suggested. Sarah started taking extra tutoring jobs, working evenings while Emily watched Nathan. The community's response was a mix of genuine concern and whispered speculation. Casseroles and sympathy cards arrived daily, but so did rumors. Some suggested Michael had crossed the wrong people, while others hinted at personal demons or debts. The Sunday after Michael returned home, Father Gregory devoted his sermon to accepting God's mysterious ways, his eyes never quite meeting Sarah's in the congregation. Sister Mary Catherine became a regular visitor, bringing not just food but quiet determination. She had known Michael since he was a boy in Sunday school, and she saw through the official narrative. Her questions about Michael's recent work earned her suspicious glances from Father Gregory and a friendly visit from Chief Thompson. The physical therapy sessions were grueling. Michael had to learn everything anew: how to navigate his home, how to eat without seeing, how to identify objects by touch. The occupational therapist, David Morton, worked patiently with him, but frustration frequently boiled over. "I'm not a child," Michael would shout, knocking things over, then apologizing through tears of shame. Sarah found her husband one night in his office, running his fingers over his old notebooks, trying to read the embossed impressions of his handwriting. "I had proof," he whispered. "I had everything documented. They didn't just take my sight, Sarah. They took the truth. She held him as he wept, his strong frame shaking with sobs that spoke of more than physical loss. The investigation stalled predictably. Chief Thompson reported dead ends, no witnesses, no usable security footage, no traceable evidence. The attack was officially classified as a random act of violence, filed away with other unsolved cases. When Sarah pressed for updates, she received polite dismissals and suggestions to focus on healing. Local media moved on to other stories. The charity fund investigation disappeared from public discussion. Judge Harrison continued presiding over cases, Father Gregory led his services, and the machinery of corruption hummed along undisturbed. Only Sister Mary Catherine noticed how certain church renovation projects quietly disappeared from the schedule, funds redistributed with careful precision. Michael's world shrank to the confines of his home, where every step required careful counting, every movement planned. The sounds of his children leaving for school, Sarah's goodbye kisses, the tick of the clock, these became his new markers of time. But in the endless darkness, his journalist's mind kept working, connecting dots, remembering details. They had silenced his expose, but they couldn't erase what he knew. 1 month after the attack, a letter arrived, addressed to Michael in careful handwriting. Sister Mary Catherine found him tracing its edges, trying to decode its secrets. "Read it to me," he asked. But before she could, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her voice tight with worry. "The bank called," she said. "They're foreclosing on the house." James Parker's arrival in the Andersons' lives seemed like divine intervention. The young reporter from the rival newspaper, the Millbrook Times, appeared at their door one rainy afternoon, his press credentials and earnest demeanor instantly winning Sarah's trust. "I want to help finish the story Michael started," he explained, his voice carrying the kind of determination Michael recognized from his own early days in journalism. Over weeks, Parker became a regular visitor, spending hours recording Michael's recollections of the investigation. His notebook filled with details about shell companies, suspicious transactions, and the intricate web of relationships connecting Judge Harrison to the church's finances. "We need to be methodical," Parker would say, "build an ironclad case they can't bury this time." Sarah watched their collaboration with growing hope. Parker helped with household chores, brought groceries, and even tutored Nathan in math. Emily particularly took to him, finding a mentor for her budding interest in journalism. "He's like the big brother I never had," she told her mother one evening. The young reporter's presence seemed to lift the dark cloud that had settled over their home since the attack. Michael found new purpose in their partnership. Though blind, his mind remained sharp, and Parker's questions helped him reconstruct his investigation piece by piece. They developed a system. Michael would describe documents he remembered, and Parker would track down copies. "We're getting close," Parker would say, his excitement palpable. "This story will shake Millbrook to its foundations." The first warning signs were subtle. Sister Mary Catherine noticed Parker leaving Judge Harrison's office one afternoon. When questioned, he explained it away as research for another story. Small inconsistencies appeared in his questions, details that didn't quite align with previous conversations. But the family, desperate for allies, dismissed these red flags. Then came the article that shattered everything. The Millbrook Times Sunday edition ran a front-page expose blind ambition. The fall of Michael Anderson. Parker's byline led a devastating character assassination. The article painted Michael as a desperate man who had fabricated evidence against respected community leaders, suggesting his injuries resulted from a confrontation with angry sources he had attempted to blackmail. The piece was masterfully crafted, using Michael's own words, twisted and taken out of context. It quoted anonymous sources claiming he had a gambling problem, that he had demanded money to suppress stories. Parker had even interviewed Sarah's colleagues, extracting innocent comments that now seemed damning. The article suggested the attack might have been self-inflicted, a bid for sympathy after his schemes unraveled. The betrayal cut deeper than the acid ever had. Michael sat in silence as Sarah read the article aloud, her voice breaking. Emily rushed from the room in tears, while Nathan asked in confusion why their friend would tell such lies. The phone started ringing, reporters, neighbors, church members, all wanting comments on the allegations. Sarah found Michael in his office later that night, methodically running his fingers over his old press awards. "I trusted him," he said quietly. "I told him everything. He wasn't building a case against Harrison, he was building one against me." The realization that they had invited their enemy into their home, shared meals with him, trusted him with their children, felt like a physical blow. The article's impact was immediate and devastating. The Disability Review Board suddenly required additional documentation. The bank accelerated their foreclosure proceedings. Emily came home crying after overhearing classmates discussing how her father was a corrupt journalist who got what he deserved. Nathan's friends were no longer allowed to visit. Father Gregory used his next sermon to speak about the importance of truth and integrity, his words aimed like arrows at the Anderson family's pew. Judge Harrison, quoted in a follow-up article, expressed deep disappointment in a once-respected colleague. The police department released a statement suggesting they might need to re-evaluate certain closed cases Michael had reported on. Parker's betrayal was complete and calculated. He had spent weeks gaining their trust, learning their vulnerabilities, understanding exactly how to destroy not just Michael's reputation, but his entire family's standing in the community. The young reporter's career soared. He was soon offered a position at a major city newspaper, his takedown of a corrupt journalist serving as his ticket to bigger opportunities. Sister Mary Catherine arrived the morning after the article's publication to find Sarah sitting on the front porch, staring blankly at their well-tended garden. "They took everything," Sarah whispered. "Michael's sight, his reputation, our future. What more can they take from us?" The elderly nun had no answer, but her presence offered silent solidarity against the tide of betrayal. The article hung over Millbrook like a dark cloud, its allegations seeping into every conversation, poisoning every relationship. Michael, already imprisoned in darkness, now found himself trapped in a wider isolation. The truth he had fought to expose was buried deeper than ever, replaced by a carefully constructed lie that would follow his family for years to come. The fallout from Parker's article spread through Millbrook like a virus, infecting every aspect of the Andersons' lives. At St. Patrick's Elementary, Sarah's fellow teachers maintained professional courtesy, but conversations stopped when she entered the break room. Parents requested their children be moved to different classes, citing concerns about classroom integrity. The principal, Thomas Walker, called her in for a routine performance review, though her 20 years of exemplary service spoke for itself. Emily faced the cruelest treatment at Millbrook High School. Former friends crossed hallways to avoid her, whispered conversations fell silent as she passed, and her locker was vandalized with the word liar scratched into the metal. The debate team, which she had captained, held a special meeting to elect a new leader, citing her family situation as a concern. Only her best friend, Rachel Martinez, stood by her, facing social exile herself for her loyalty. Nathan's experience in elementary school was equally heartbreaking. Birthday party invitations stopped coming. At recess, he sat alone, watching other children play from a distance. His teacher noticed his artwork growing darker, houses with no windows, black scribbles over family portraits. The school counselor suggested family therapy, implying the problem lay not with the bullies but with the Andersons themselves. The church community's reaction proved particularly painful. The same people who had brought casseroles after the attack now crossed the street to avoid interaction. During Sunday Mass, an empty circle formed around the family's usual pew, as if corruption might be contagious. Collection baskets passed over their row, scripture readings about false witness carried pointed emphasis, and Father Gregory's sermons increasingly focused on themes of moral decay and the wages of sin. Financial pressures mounted as the community turned its back. Sarah's private tutoring clients cancelled one by one, each with a different polite excuse. Michael's disability claim faced routine. Delays, each appeal requiring more documentation, more signatures, more proof of an injury everyone had witnessed. The local grocery store stopped accepting their checks. The pharmacy demanded payment in advance, and even the children's dentist suggested finding another practice. Sister Mary Catherine watched in helpless anger as families who had known the Andersons for generations abandoned them. Her attempts to speak up were met with gentle but firm suggestions from Father Gregory about focusing on her spiritual duties. Even the other nuns began avoiding her, fearful of being associated with her support of the disgraced family. The local business community, once friendly with Michael through his reporting, now treated his name like poison. The hardware store owner who had helped Michael build Emily's treehouse now claimed not to remember him. The cafe where he had written many of his articles posted a sign reserving the right to refuse service. The local bank manager who had attended the same church for 30 years now required Sarah to have all transactions verified by a supervisor. Judge Harrison's influence touched every aspect of their isolation. Building inspectors suddenly found code violations in their home. Their car insurance was cancelled due to risk reassessment. The local library questioned Emily's right to check out books, citing an address verification issue. Each incident seemed minor in isolation, but together they formed a suffocating web of social and economic pressure. The media circus following Parker's article brought new torments. Regional newspapers picked up the story, each adding their own spin to the narrative of corruption and deceit. Television crews parked outside their house, hoping to catch footage of the disgraced journalist, who had allegedly fabricated stories for years. Online forums filled with speculation and cruel jokes about a blind man who couldn't see his own corruption. Their neighbors, the Wilsons, who had shared summer barbecues and Christmas celebrations with the Andersons for a decade, installed security cameras pointedly aimed at the Andersons' property. Their children were forbidden from playing with Nathan. The neighborhood watch program suddenly became very active, with regular patrols passing by the Anderson house at all hours. The isolation grew so complete that even daily tasks became exercises in endurance. Sarah learned to shop 2 towns over, where fewer people knew them. Emily took different routes to school each day to avoid harassment. Nathan stopped playing in the front yard, retreating to his room with video games as his only companions. Michael, already trapped in physical darkness, felt the walls of social darkness closing in just as completely. One particularly difficult Sunday, as the family walked down the church steps after Mass, Emily overheard an elderly parishioner whisper, "The sins of the father shall be visited upon the children." The biblical quote, delivered with such righteous satisfaction, captured the community's verdict. The Andersons weren't just fallen, they were now object lessons in the consequences of challenging the established order. The Anderson family's descent into the abyss began with Sarah's collapse in the middle of her classroom. The stress, sleepless nights, and constant anxiety finally took their toll. Her students watched in horror as their beloved teacher crumpled to the floor during a math lesson, her body finally surrendering to months of unrelenting pressure. The diagnosis was devastating severe exhaustion complicated by developing ulcers and dangerously high blood pressure. Without Sarah's income and facing mounting medical bills, the family's financial situation became dire. The bank's foreclosure notices arrived with mechanical regularity, each one a paper reminder of their dwindling options. Emily, at 14, made the heart-wrenching decision to drop out of all her extracurricular activities to take a job at a diner 2 towns over, where the name Anderson didn't carry the same stigma. Her college savings now went to buying groceries and paying utility bills. Nathan's withdrawal from the world deepened with each passing day. The once vibrant 10-year-old stopped speaking unless directly addressed, his artistic talent turning to dark, troubling drawings that worried his teachers. The school counselor noted signs of severe depression, but the family couldn't afford the recommended therapy. At night, they could hear him crying in his sleep, but their attempts to comfort him were met with silent rejection. Michael's depression took a more dangerous turn. One evening, Sarah found him in their bathroom holding his old razor, his hands shaking. "I'm just a burden now," he whispered, his voice hollow. "The insurance policy would at least give you and the kids a fresh start." She held him until the moment passed, but the incident left a deep scar on their relationship. Sarah began hiding anything that could be used for self-harm, living in constant fear of what her husband might do in his moments of despair. Their home, once filled with laughter and warmth, became a tomb of silence. Dinner conversations, when they happened at all, consisted of mechanical exchanges about basic necessities. The piano that had once resonated with Emily's practice sessions sat untouched, gathering dust. Nathan's art supplies dried up in their boxes, his easel folded and stored in the attic. Even the family dog, Max, seemed to sense the heavy atmosphere, his tail no longer wagging when family members came home. The final blow came when Sarah's doctor ordered complete bed rest. The ulcers had worsened, and her blood pressure remained dangerously high despite medication. Emily took on more shifts at the diner, working every hour her school schedule would allow. But her grades began to slip. But academics seemed irrelevant in the face of survival. Dark circles formed under her eyes as she struggled to balance homework with her new role as family provider. Michael spent his days in his office, running his fingers over Braille books he was trying to learn but couldn't focus on. The darkness that had been merely physical now seemed to have infected his soul. He replayed his investigation obsessively in his mind, wondering if he had missed something, if there had been signs of Parker's betrayal he should have noticed. The weight of responsibility for his family's suffering crushed him more with each passing day. The neighbors' children no longer played in the adjacent yard, their parents having forbidden any contact. The silence was broken only by the occasional whispered comment from passing neighbors or the sound of cars slowing down to stare at their increasingly unkempt property. The once pristine lawn, which Michael had meticulously maintained every weekend, grew wild and untamed, becoming a physical manifestation of their family's decline. Nathan started refusing to go to school, claiming stomach aches and headaches. When forced to attend, he would sit silently in class, not participating, not engaging. His teachers' reports grew increasingly concerned, noting his complete withdrawal from social interaction. One particularly difficult morning, he clung to his bedroom doorframe, sobbing, "I can't go back there. They all hate us. They hate us because of what happened to Dad." The family's isolation became absolute. Bills piled up unopened on the kitchen counter. The refrigerator grew increasingly empty, with Emily trying to stretch their meager resources as far as possible. Sarah, confined to bed, could only listen helplessly as her family fell apart around her. The house itself seemed to be decaying, with minor repairs left unattended due to lack of funds and energy. Michael began having nightmares about the attack, waking up screaming, reliving the moment the acid hit his face. These episodes left him shaken for days, barely able to function. The darkness that had once been just in his eyes now seemed to fill every corner of their lives, an oppressive force that threatened to suffocate them all. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled overhead, Emily found her father sitting in his old reading chair, holding a family photo he couldn't see. "I did this to us," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was fighting for justice, but I just destroyed everything we had." Emily couldn't find the words to comfort him, the weight of their shared pain too heavy for her young shoulders to bear. Sister Mary Catherine stood in the rain outside the Anderson home, her aged hands clutching a folder of documents she had spent months secretly collecting. At 72, she no longer feared the consequences of defying Father Gregory or Judge Harrison. The systematic destruction of the Anderson family had awakened something fierce in her, a determination to uncover the truth that had cost Michael his sight. The elderly nun had begun her own investigation the day after Michael's attack, driven by decades of witnessing small inconsistencies in the church's finances. Her position as the senior nun at St. Mary's gave her access to historical records that others might overlook. Each evening, after her official duties ended, she meticulously copied documents, noting patterns of donations that coincided with suspicious zoning changes and judicial decisions, A network of unlikely allies emerged around her mission. Thomas, the night janitor at the courthouse, began saving interesting documents from Judge Harrison's wastepaper basket. Maria, a junior clerk at the bank, quietly noted unusual transactions. Even Mrs. Patterson, the church secretary, started making copies of suspicious correspondence, though her hands shook with fear each time. The breakthrough came through an unexpected source. A young priest, Father David, newly assigned to St. Mary's, approached Sister Mary Catherine after witnessing a heated exchange between Father Gregory and Judge Harrison. His conscience troubled by what he'd overheard, he offered to help document the ongoing corruption. His youth and perceived naivety made him invisible to the powerful men who controlled Millbrook. Late one night, Sister Mary Catherine discovered a pattern that made her gasp. The charity fund transactions Michael had begun to uncover were merely a smokescreen for something far larger. Behind the missing donations lay a complex network of property deals, each one coinciding with favorable court decisions from Judge Harrison. The money trail led to offshore accounts, dummy corporations, and eventually to a series of mysterious deaths spanning 2 decades. She knew she needed help to understand the full implications of what she'd found. Through Father David's connections, she made contact with an FBI agent in a neighboring city. Agent Rachel Martinez listened carefully to her evidence, taking notes but making no promises. The nun's detailed documentation, however, caught her attention. "This isn't just corruption," the agent said. "This is systematic racketeering." Hope began to take root, but Sister Mary Catherine knew they needed to move carefully. She started leaving anonymous notes for Sarah, small messages of encouragement signed only with a cross. She arranged for anonymous donations to appear at their doorstep: groceries, gift cards, cash in envelopes. Through her network, she ensured that Emily's diner shifts were always during the busiest times, maximizing her tips. The nun's quiet resistance inspired others. Rachel Martinez, Emily's only remaining friend at school, organized a secret support group among students. They left encouraging notes in Emily's locker, shared class notes when she missed school for work, and stood up to bullies who targeted her. The owner of the diner, understanding Emily's situation, started adding extra hours to her paycheck without requiring her to work them. Father David found ways to visit Michael, ostensibly for spiritual guidance but actually bringing news of the investigation's progress. He spoke of hope and justice, carefully dropping hints about Sister Mary Catherine's discoveries. Michael, though still deep in depression, began to show small signs of interest in the world beyond his darkness. The evidence mounted steadily. Sister Mary Catherine's folder grew thick with documented proof of corruption, witness statements, and financial records. Agent Martinez made quiet trips to Millbrook, interviewing key witnesses under the guise of bank audits. The web of corruption began to reveal itself, each thread leading back to Judge Harrison and his collaborators. One evening, as Sister Mary Catherine left yet another anonymous care package on the Andersons' porch, she noticed a light in Michael's office. Through the window, she could see him sitting at his desk, head bowed but back straight, a posture she hadn't seen since the attack. Sarah stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, as Father David spoke animatedly about something. For the first time in months, there was energy in that room, a sense of purpose returning. The nun clutched a letter in her pocket, one she'd received that morning from Agent Martinez. The FBI was nearly ready to move, but they needed one final piece of evidence. More importantly, they needed Michael's help to put it all together. His memory of the documents he'd seen, combined with Sister Mary Catherine's evidence, could finally expose the truth. As she walked back to the convent in the gathering dusk, Sister Mary Catherine smiled. Tomorrow she would visit the Andersons with news that would change everything: stories of miracles at a monastery across the state, where Padre Pio was said to heal the sick and restore sight to the blind. It would seem like a desperate grab at hope, but she knew it would get Michael out of Millbrook, away from watching eyes, where Agent Martinez could safely debrief him. The journey to Padre Pio's monastery began in secrecy before dawn. Sister Mary Catherine had arranged everything: a borrowed van with tinted windows, a circuitous route to avoid detection, and a small group of trusted helpers. Sarah held Michael's hand in the back seat, while Emily and Nathan huddled together, all of them feeling like fugitives in their own hometown. Agent Martinez followed discreetly in an unmarked car, maintaining radio silence unless absolutely necessary. The first attempt to leave Millbrook was thwarted by an unexpected police roadblock. Officer Wilson, one of Chief Thompson's most loyal deputies, seemed particularly interested in their vehicle. Sister Mary Catherine, with decades of practiced innocence, explained they were heading to a prayer retreat. Her calm demeanor and clerical authority barely managed to deflect his suspicious questioning. They doubled back, took country roads, and tried again, precious hours slipping away. Judge Harrison's influence reached further than expected. At their first rest stop, 2 hours from Millbrook, a black SUV appeared in the parking lot, its occupants taking photos. Emily spotted them first, her hands trembling as she guided her father back to the van. Father David, who had insisted on accompanying them despite the risks to his position, created a diversion by deliberately causing a scene at the gas station, allowing them to slip away unnoticed. The strain of the journey wore heavily on Michael. Each bump in the road, each unexpected stop, sent waves of anxiety through his body. The darkness that had become his world seemed to pulse with danger. Sarah noticed him counting his breaths, a technique he'd learned to manage panic attacks. Nathan, unusually perceptive, began describing the passing landscape in detail, giving his father something to focus on besides fear. Their purses were persistent. By midday, they had to abandon the main highways completely. Agent Martinez's law enforcement contacts reported that an APB had been issued for their vehicle, citing false claims of kidnapping and endangerment. They switched cars in a small town, trading the van for an old station wagon belonging to Martinez's cousin. The delay cost them precious time, but safety demanded caution. Sister Mary Catherine revealed more of her evidence during the journey, explaining to Michael how each piece fit into the larger puzzle. The charity fund scandal was merely the surface of a decades-long criminal enterprise. Judge Harrison hadn't just been stealing from the church, he'd been using his position to facilitate money laundering, extortion, and worse. The elderly nun's voice shook as she described discovering records of accidents that had befallen previous investigators. The afternoon brought a new crisis. Sarah, still weak from her illness, began experiencing severe pain. They couldn't risk a hospital. Harrison's network included medical administrators across the state. Father David, who had basic medical training from his missionary work, did his best to make her comfortable in the back of the station wagon. Emily held her mother's hand, singing softly the lullabies Sarah used to sing to her. As dusk approached, they encountered their most dangerous moment. A state police cruiser began following them, its presence growing more conspicuous with each passing mile. Agent Martinez, communicating through burner phones, confirmed the officer had run their plates. Father David made a bold decision, pulling into a small church parking lot. As the cruiser followed, the priest emerged, collar visible, and approached the officer with a story about leading a prayer group for troubled youth. His genuine concern for Michael's family translated into a convincing performance. The monastery appeared on the horizon just as night was falling, a sprawling complex of old stone buildings silhouetted against the darkening sky. But their arrival brought no immediate relief. 2 men in dark suits stood at the entrance, their stance and alertness suggesting they weren't monks. Sister Mary Catherine's heart sank, recognizing one as a regular visitor to Judge Harrison's chambers. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as either quick thinking or divine intervention. As they approached the gate, a group of monks emerged from evening prayers. Father David, seizing the moment, guided their group straight into the middle of the procession. The surprised monks, sensing urgency in the priest's manner, instinctively closed ranks around them. The men in suits could only watch helplessly as Michael and his family disappeared into the monastery grounds, absorbed into the flow of robed figures. Inside the monastery walls, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The air itself seemed charged with possibility. Ancient stone corridors echoed with whispered prayers, and the scent of incense wrapped around them like a protective blanket. A young monk led them through winding passages to a small courtyard where they were told Father Pio would meet them in the morning. That night, in small, sparse cells provided by the sympathetic monks, the Anderson family experienced their first peaceful rest in months. Michael sat by an open window, feeling the cool night air on his face. The darkness around him felt different here, less oppressive, more alive with potential. Sarah slept soundly for the first time since her collapse, while Emily and Nathan explored the monastery's peaceful gardens under the watchful eyes of novice monks. Dawn at the monastery brought an otherworldly quiet. Michael sat in the small chapel where he would meet Father Pio, his hands trembling slightly as he ran them over the worn wooden pew. Sarah knelt beside him, her prayers a whispered litany of hope. Through the stained glass windows, early morning light painted the stone floor in kaleidoscopic patterns that Michael could no longer see. Father Pio's entrance was marked by silence rather than sound. The elderly priest moved with surprising grace for his age, his presence filling the chapel with an inexplicable warmth. Those present would later struggle to describe his appearance. Some remembered his silver hair, others his penetrating eyes, but all agreed on the overwhelming sense of peace that accompanied him. James Parker, who had followed them to the monastery under the pretense of writing a follow-up story, sat in the back row. His presence had been discovered an hour earlier, but rather than evict him, Father David had insisted he stay. "Witness the truth the young priest had told him. Since you've spent so long writing lies." Parker's notepad remained unopened in his lap, his usual journalistic detachment shaken by the atmosphere. When Father Pio reached Michael, he didn't immediately speak or pray. Instead, he simply stood there, one hand resting lightly on Michael's shoulder. The silence deepened, became almost tangible. Sister Mary Catherine later swore she could see a faint light emanating from where the priest's hand touched Michael, though others present didn't notice anything unusual. "Your eyes were taken because you dared to see the truth," Father Pio finally spoke, his voice carrying an authority that filled the chapel. "But they could not blind your soul." He placed both hands on Michael's face, thumbs gently touching his damaged eyes. The temperature in the chapel seemed to drop, then rise dramatically. Several witnesses reported feeling a sudden surge of electricity in the air. What happened next was recorded in multiple accounts, though each tells it slightly differently. Michael gasped, his body going rigid. Sarah gripped his hand tighter, tears streaming down her face. Emily and Nathan, watching from a nearby pew, clung to each other. Father Pio began to pray, not in the formal Latin of the church, but in simple, powerful words that seemed to resonate with the stone walls themselves. A strange light began to fill the chapel, not from the windows or candles, but seeming to emanate from within Father Pio himself. Michael later described feeling an intense heat in his eyes, not painful like the acid had been, but purifying. "It was like fire and ice and lightning all at once," he would say, "but somehow it felt like coming home." The moment of healing itself was both sudden and gradual. Michael's first awareness of light came as a faint glow, then colors began to seep into his darkness. Shapes emerged, blurry at first, then with increasing clarity. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Sarah's face, lined with worry and hope, more beautiful to him than any sight he'd ever beheld. "I can see," he whispered, then louder, "I can see." The words echoed off the chapel walls, a proclamation of the impossible made real. Sarah sobbed, Emily and Nathan rushed forward, and the small group of witnesses burst into spontaneous prayer and thanksgiving. Sister Mary Catherine sank to her knees, her own prayers of gratitude mixing with tears of joy. In the back of the chapel, James Parker sat frozen, his cynicism and carefully constructed narrative crumbling in the face of undeniable miracle. He watched as Michael, with restored sight, looked at each of his children as if seeing them for the first time. The reporter's hands shook as he finally opened his notebook, knowing he would never be able to write the story his employers expected. Father Pio, however, wasn't finished. He turned to Parker, his eyes seeming to peer into the young reporter's soul. "You too were blind," he said softly. Though your eyes worked perfectly well, Parker found himself walking forward, drawn by a power he couldn't explain. Before the assembled witnesses, he fell to his knees and confessed everything: the bribes, the lies, the carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy Michael's reputation. The chapel erupted in a chaos of emotions. Agent Martinez, who had been posing as a visitor, immediately began recording Parker's confession. Sister Mary Catherine pulled out her folders of evidence, and Michael, now able to see, began identifying key documents. But above the legal implications, there was a sense of witnessing something profound, not just the restoration of sight, but the restoration of truth itself. As the morning light grew stronger, Father Pio quietly withdrew, leaving behind a chapel transformed. Michael held his family close, drinking in their faces, while Parker sat with Father David, pouring out the full story of corruption and his own role in it. Outside, the monastery bells began to ring, their sound carrying across the valley, announcing to the world that on this morning, in this place, the impossible had become possible. The joy of Michael's miraculous recovery lasted precisely 3 days before the storm hit. Judge Harrison and his allies launched a coordinated attack that made their previous efforts seem gentle by comparison. Local and national media outlets began running stories questioning the legitimacy of Father Pio's miracle, with medical experts suggesting Michael's blindness had been psychosomatic all along. The headlines were "Brutal Blind Faith, the Convenient Miracle," and "Scientific Community Debunks Religious Healing Claims." The pressure on the monastery intensified. Health department officials suddenly discovered urgent concerns requiring immediate inspection. Tax assessors appeared, questioning the monastery's exempt status. Father Pio faced accusations of practicing medicine without a license, while Father David was summoned back to the diocese to explain his unauthorized absence from St. Mary's. Sarah's health took a devastating turn. The stress of the media circus and constant harassment triggered a severe relapse. She collapsed during a particularly aggressive interview ambush outside their home, her body finally buckling under the strain. The local hospital, once friendly and accommodating, now claimed to have no available beds. They were forced to drive 3 hours to find medical care, where doctors discovered her ulcers had perforated. Judge Harrison's influence reached into the hospital itself. Sarah's medical records mysteriously disappeared, then reappeared with concerning discrepancies. Her insurance claims were repeatedly denied, citing pre-existing conditions and documentation irregularities. The mounting medical bills threatened to overwhelm the family just as they had begun to hope for recovery. The attacks became more personal and vicious. Anonymous letters arrived daily, filled with threats and accusations. Emily's college acceptance letters were suddenly under review due to new information about her family background. Nathan's school suggested he might benefit from alternative education options. Even their family dog, Max, was poisoned, though thankfully they got him to a vet in time. James Parker's confession, rather than bringing immediate justice, complicated matters further. The reporter was found unconscious in his apartment, an apparent suicide attempt that many suspected was staged. When he recovered, he recanted his confession, claiming he had been under duress at the monastery. His newspaper printed a front-page retraction, suggesting the entire miracle story was part of an elaborate scheme to discredit honest officials. Sister Mary Catherine faced the most direct retaliation. Her decades of service meant nothing as she was accused of stealing church documents, interfering with official business, and undermining the moral authority of the church. Father Gregory publicly called for her removal, citing concerns about her mental stability. The other nuns were forbidden from speaking to her, leaving the elderly woman isolated in her own convent. Agent Martinez's investigation stalled as key witnesses suddenly became unavailable. the bank clerk who had provided financial records took an unexpected vacation to a country without extradition. The courthouse janitor who had saved documents was arrested on decades-old charges that had mysteriously resurfaced. Every thread of evidence seemed to unravel just as they tried to pull it tighter. The monastery itself came under siege. Religious protesters, secretly paid by Harrison's allies, appeared with signs condemning false miracles and heretical practices. Local authorities began citing the monastery for noise violations, parking infractions, and other minor but costly offenses. Father Pio was ordered to cease all healing services pending a thorough investigation by church authorities. Michael found himself fighting on multiple fronts. His restored sight, rather than being a blessing, became a source of constant scrutiny. Medical researchers demanded tests, skeptics challenged him to prove his previous blindness, and journalists questioned every aspect of his story. The pressure to deny the miracle grew with each passing day, accompanied by hints that such a denial might make their problems disappear. The community's reaction was swift and harsh. Their neighborhood association cited them for multiple violations, demanding immediate repairs they couldn't afford. Local businesses refused to serve them, banks froze their accounts citing suspicious activity. And their mail began arriving opened and damaged. The isolation that had followed Michael's blinding seemed mild compared to the coordinated ostracism they now faced. Through it all, Michael clung to the truth of what had happened in that chapel. Each morning he would stand at his window, watching the sunrise with restored eyes, remembering the moment of healing. But with each passing day, the weight of resistance grew heavier, the cost of standing firm became steeper, and the path to justice seemed increasingly impossible. The darkest moment came on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening at St. Mary's Hospital. Sarah lay unconscious in intensive care, her condition deteriorating despite treatment. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about complications, using terms like systemic failure and stress-induced collapse. Michael sat by her bed, his restored sight now allowing him to watch helplessly as his wife slipped away, her face pale against the stark white hospital sheets. The church's reaction had been particularly devastating. Father Gregory called an emergency parish meeting, explicitly excluding the Andersons. The meeting's outcome was swift and cruel, a formal request for their removal from the parish registry. Generations of family baptisms, confirmations, and marriages were effectively erased. Emily and Nathan were barred from their religious education classes, their upcoming confirmations indefinitely postponed. Sister Mary Catherine's sudden disappearance added another layer of despair. One morning she simply wasn't in her usual place at the convent. Her small room had been cleared out, her documents and evidence gone. The official story claimed she had been transferred to a retirement facility for rest and reflection, but no one could or would provide an address. Father David's attempts to locate her through church channels met with polite but firm obstruction. The FBI investigation ground to a halt. Agent Martinez was suddenly reassigned to a remote field office in Alaska, her case files mysteriously corrupted during transfer. Her replacement, a career bureaucrat nearing retirement, seemed more interested in closing the case than pursuing justice. The evidence they had carefully gathered began disappearing from official records, replaced by documents that told a very different story. Emily's strength finally broke under the relentless pressure. The straighter student who had dreamed of becoming a journalist like her father now barely attended classes. She was found one morning in the school bathroom, having suffered a panic attack so severe the school nurse wanted to hospitalize her. That same day, Nathan's art teacher called, concerned about the increasingly violent imagery in his drawings. The monastery that had witnessed Michael's healing now faced closure. Health inspectors discovered critical violations requiring immediate and costly repairs. The diocese launched an investigation into Father Pio's practices, temporarily suspending his authority to perform blessings or healing services. The elderly priest accepted these trials with serene dignity, but the strain showed in the deepening lines around his eyes. Financial ruin loomed closer with each passing day. Medical bills mounted as Sarah's condition required specialized care. Their savings were gone, their credit destroyed, and even basic necessities became luxury items. Emily's college fund had been emptied to pay for Sarah's treatments, destroying her dreams of higher education. The family home, already in foreclosure, began showing signs of neglect they couldn't afford to address. The media circus took a darker turn when a national news magazine published an expose suggesting the entire saga was an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. Old colleagues and friends appeared on camera, sharing concerns about Michael's character that they'd supposedly harbored for years. Each news cycle brought fresh allegations, each more outlandish than the last, yet presented with just enough plausibility to seem credible. Michael's restored sight, rather than being a gift, began to feel like a curse. He could now see every pitying glance, every turn back, every former friend crossing the street to avoid him. Worse, he could see the toll their ordeal was taking on his children, Emily's hollow eyes, Nathan's nervous tics, the way they both flinched at sudden noises or unexpected visitors. The final blow came when Father David was found badly beaten in the church parking lot, his injuries requiring surgery. Though no one could prove anything, the message was clear: support for the Andersons had become dangerous. The young priest was transferred the next day to a distant parish, his farewell letter to the family full of apologies and unspoken warnings. In their darkest hour, the Anderson family huddled in Sarah's hospital room, listening to the steady beep of monitors and the whisper of oxygen machines. Michael held his wife's frail hand, while Emily and Nathan slept fitfully in uncomfortable chairs. Through the window, they could see the lights of Millbrook, the town that had once been their home but now felt like enemy territory. That night, as rain pounded against the hospital windows and thunder rolled in the distance, Michael faced the horrible possibility that the price of truth and justice might be more than his family could survive. The miracle of his restored sight seemed a small comfort against the avalanche of destruction that had followed. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, surrounded by the ruins of their lives, he wondered if some forms of darkness were harder to bear than physical blindness. The truth burst forth like a dam breaking during Sunday morning Mass, exactly 1 month after Sarah's hospitalization. James Parker staggered into St. Mary's Church during Father Gregory's sermon, his clothes disheveled, his face showing signs of a brutal beating. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye as he clutched a laptop and a thick manila envelope. "I can't do this anymore," he shouted, his voice echoing through the stunned congregation. "God forgive me, I can't carry this sin any longer." Before security could reach him, Parker connected his laptop to the church's projection system, originally installed for hymn displays. Suddenly, the white wall behind the altar filled with surveillance footage showing Judge Harrison and Father Gregory in the church office, counting stacks of money and discussing the acid attack on Michael. The congregation sat in shocked silence as years of corruption played out before their eyes, complete with audio of Harrison planning Michael's destruction. Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance, it turned out, had been a carefully orchestrated plan. The elderly nun had spent her retirement working with a network of other nuns across the state, gathering evidence and building a case. Her documentation, meticulously organized and legally verified, had been safely stored in multiple locations. Parker had been her unexpected ally, his conscience finally breaking under the weight of his complicity. The footage continued to play as FBI agents, silently summoned by Agent Martinez's replacement, moved through the church. The retiring agent had been part of a larger federal investigation into judicial corruption, using the appearance of indifference to lull Harrison's network into a false sense of security. Years of surveillance, wiretaps, and financial records had been building toward this moment. Parker's testimony, delivered between sobs to the stunned congregation, revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Judge Harrison hadn't just stolen from the church, he'd been running a sophisticated racketeering operation that touched every aspect of Millbrook's governance. The acid attack on Michael had been ordered not just to stop his investigation, but to send a message to anyone else who might dare to question the power structure. As Parker spoke, more evidence emerged. Church members began standing up, sharing their own stories of extortion and intimidation. Mrs. Patterson, the church secretary, produced copies of incriminating documents she'd hidden away. The courthouse janitor, recently released from his fraudulent arrest, arrived with years of saved security footage showing late-night meetings and document destruction. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Father Gregory's own assistant, a quiet man who had witnessed years of corruption, had been secretly recording everything. His hidden cameras had captured countless incriminating conversations, including the planning of Sarah's medical complications. The doctors who had been manipulating her care were exposed, their actions documented in damning detail. Digital evidence flooded social media as Parker's prepared data dump went live. Encrypted files were unlocked, revealing offshore account numbers, transaction histories, and correspondence that tied the corruption directly to state and federal officials. The carefully constructed wall of power that had protected Harrison's network for decades crumbled in a matter of hours. Sister Mary Catherine emerged from hiding, escorted by federal marshals. Her retirement had been a cover for her work with the federal task force, her years of evidence forming the backbone of a RICO case that would eventually encompass 3 states. The elderly nun walked straight to Michael, who sat with Emily and Nathan in their usual pew, and simply said, "Your father's story can finally be told." The congregation watched in stunned silence as Judge Harrison and Father Gregory were led away in handcuffs, their carefully maintained facades of respectability shattered. Chief Thompson, attempting to flee the church, found himself surrounded by his own officers, many of whom had been secretly cooperating with federal investigators for months. In the hospital, Sarah opened her eyes for the first time in weeks as the corrupt doctors were replaced by a new medical team. The truth about her deliberately mismanaged care emerged through medical records hidden by a conscientious nurse. Her recovery, once suspiciously stalled, began to progress rapidly under proper treatment. Parker's beaten face told its own story. He had been attacked by Harrison's men upon declaring his intention to confess, but the beating had only strengthened his resolve. "I saw a miracle," he told the federal agents taking his statement. "Not just Michael's healing, but the miracle of truth breaking through darkness. I couldn't be part of burying that truth any longer." The federal investigation expanded like ripples in a pond, each revelation leading to deeper discoveries. Judge Harrison's arrest triggered a domino effect that reached far beyond Millbrook's borders. FBI teams descended on the courthouse, bank offices, and church administrative buildings, their evidence bags filling with decades of corrupted history. The investigation revealed a criminal enterprise so vast that it required a special task force just to process the documentation. The turning point in public opinion came when national media outlets picked up the story, not of a questionable miracle, but of small-town corruption that read like a crime thriller. Journalists who had previously cast doubt on Michael's healing now clamored for interviews about his role in exposing the scandal. The same newspapers that had questioned his credibility now hailed him as a hero who had sacrificed everything in pursuit of truth. Father Gregory's confession, given in exchange for leniency, exposed the church hierarchy's complicity. His detailed testimony revealed how Harrison had systematically infiltrated every major institution in Millbrook, using blackmail, bribes, and threats to maintain control. The priest's breakdown during questioning became a powerful symbol of corruption's corrosive effect on the soul, his tears of remorse captured in a photograph that would win a Pulitzer Prize. The unraveling of Harrison's network sent shockwaves through the state's judicial system. 3 judges in neighboring counties resigned abruptly. The state Supreme Court ordered a review of every case Harrison had presided over in the past 20 years. Convicts who had claimed innocence suddenly found their cases reopened, their allegations of judicial misconduct given fresh scrutiny under federal oversight. Sarah's recovery accelerated as evidence emerged of deliberate medical malpractice. The doctors who had manipulated her care faced criminal charges, their medical licenses suspended pending investigation. Hospital administrators who had cooperated with Harrison's scheme were placed on administrative leave. New medical staff, brought in by federal overseers, expressed amazement at the systematic abuse of medical ethics that had occurred. Sister Mary Catherine's return to St. Mary's became a moment of triumph. The elderly nun, now recognized as a key figure in bringing down the corruption, received a standing ovation from the congregation. Her meticulous record-keeping had provided prosecutors with a roadmap of criminal activity spanning decades. The same church members who had shunned her now sought her blessing, humbled by her quiet courage. The financial investigation uncovered staggering amounts of stolen money. Forensic accountants traced millions through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Harrison's network had siphoned funds from every major project in Millbrook for years: school construction, road maintenance, charitable donations, all had been sources of illicit profit. The revelation of theft from children's healthcare programs particularly enraged the community. Chief Thompson's interrogation revealed the full extent of law enforcement corruption. Honest officers who had been forced out or silenced began coming forward with their own stories. The acid attack on Michael was exposed as just one instance in a pattern of organized intimidation. Officers who had participated in the cover-up faced federal charges, while those who had resisted the corruption were vindicated and reinstated. The Anderson family's rehabilitation in the community happened swiftly. Anonymous hate mail turned to letters of apology. Former friends who had turned their backs now approached with shame and regret. The neighborhood association that had harassed them suddenly found urgent need to repair the damage they had caused to the Anderson property. Local businesses that had shunned them now offered credit and support. James Parker's role proved crucial in the prosecution's case. Despite attempts on his life, he testified extensively about the mechanics of the cover-up, including his own part in destroying Michael's reputation. His detailed account of how Harrison's network had manipulated public opinion provided prosecutors with a blueprint of criminal conspiracy. His public apology to the Andersons, delivered through tears on national television, became a powerful symbol of redemption. Father Pio's monastery, cleared of all allegations, became a symbol of resilience against corruption. The health code violations were exposed as fabrications, the tax issues disappeared, and the diocese officially recognized the healing miracle after a thorough investigation. Pilgrims began arriving in greater numbers, drawn not just by the possibility of healing, but by the story of truth's triumph over power. The final piece of justice came with the discovery of Harrison's personal files, hidden in a secret room behind his chamber's bookcase. These documents provided evidence of crimes dating back to his earliest days as a judge, including proof of his involvement in mysterious deaths that had haunted Millbrook for years. The files ensured that Harrison would never again see freedom, his power finally and irrevocably broken. 1 year after the truth emerged, Millbrook gathered for a ceremony of healing and reconciliation. The town square, once dominated by Judge Harrison's influence, now hosted a memorial to those who had suffered under his regime. Michael, standing with Sarah fully recovered by his side, unveiled a plaque honoring the courage of Sister Mary Catherine and all who had fought for truth. The church community, under new leadership, had undergone its own transformation. Father David returned as head pastor, his vision of transparency and social justice helping to rebuild trust. The Catholic Charities Fund, restructured with strict oversight, now truly served those in need. Regular audits and public reporting ensured that every dollar reached its intended recipients. Emily and Nathan flourished in the aftermath of justice. Emily's college dreams were revived through a special scholarship established by reformed business leaders, while Nathan's artistic talents found recognition in a town newly appreciative of truth and beauty. Their home, saved from foreclosure by community action, became a symbol of resilience and redemption. Sister Mary Catherine, though offered prestigious positions elsewhere, chose to remain in Millbrook. Her quiet wisdom helped guide the community's healing process. The convent established a center for investigative journalism in her name, ensuring that future generations would have the tools and courage to expose corruption. James Parker found his own path to redemption, establishing a foundation to support whistleblowers and investigative journalists. His regular column in the Millbrook Herald, Truth and Consequences, became required reading for journalism students nationwide. His friendship with Michael, forged in the crucible of confession and forgiveness, proved that redemption was possible, even from the darkest betrayal. Michael's restored sight seemed more miraculous than ever as he watched his community heal and grow. The darkness that had once engulfed his world had led to a greater light, the illumination of truth and justice. Father Pio's words proved prophetic physical sight had been restored, but more importantly, the soul of a community had been healed. The miracle at the monastery became more than just a story of restored sight. It evolved into a testament to the transformative power of faith, truth, and justice. Michael's journey from darkness to light paralleled the community's own path from corruption to redemption. His story, chronicled in a best-selling book titled Through Darkness to Light, inspired similar investigations in towns across America. Father Pio's simple message resonated beyond religious boundaries. True healing comes not just to the body, but to the soul. The monastery became a pilgrimage site, not only for those seeking physical healing, but for those in search of moral courage and spiritual renewal. Every visitor heard the intertwined stories of a miracle and a community's awakening. The Anderson family's legacy in Millbrook transcended their personal triumph. Their experience became a teaching moment about the cost and value of standing for truth. Local schools incorporated ethics courses, using their story to illustrate the importance of moral courage. The annual Anderson Integrity Award recognized individuals who demonstrated exceptional commitment to truth and justice. The most profound lesson emerged not from the miracle itself, but from the community's response to it. Millbrook learned that real miracles weren't just supernatural events, but could be found in daily acts of courage, integrity, and redemption. The town's transformation proved that even the deepest corruption could be overcome when people chose truth over comfort, justice over convenience. Sarah, speaking at the first anniversary of Harrison's conviction, summed up their journey. We experienced two miracles. The first restored my husband's sight. The second restored our community's soul. Both required faith not just in God, but in the power of truth and the possibility of redemption. Our darkness became light, our despair became hope, and our isolation became community. The final miracle of Millbrook wasn't just about one man's healing or one town's redemption. It was about the eternal truth that light always overcomes darkness, if only we have the courage to stand for what's right. The miracle of Father Pio teaches us that true healing extends far beyond physical restoration. In the darkness of corruption and injustice, it was not just Michael's sight that needed healing, but the soul of an entire community. The Anderson family's journey shows us that miracles don't just descend from heaven, they emerge through the courageous actions of ordinary people who dare to stand for truth. Sister Mary Catherine's quiet persistence, Father David's unwavering support, and even James Parker's redemption demonstrate that light can pierce the deepest darkness when people choose faith over fear, truth over comfort, and justice over convenience. Most importantly, the story reminds us that no power, no matter how entrenched, can withstand the combined force of faith, truth, and human dignity. In the end, the greatest miracle wasn't the restoration of sight, but the awakening of conscience and the triumph of justice. Dear viewers, thank you for joining us for the miracle of Father Pio. If this story has touched your heart, please consider supporting our team by subscribing to our channel. Your subscription helps us continue creating meaningful content that inspires and moves people. Share this video with your friends and family. Let them experience this powerful story of faith, redemption, and justice. Don't forget to like the video and leave your thoughts and emotions in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story affected you. Would you like to hear part 2 of the Anderson family's journey? Let us know in the comments, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories.